Hello, my name is Paul Harris, America's editor at Mining Journal, and I'm joined today by Paul Westsells, President and CEO of Western Copper and Gold. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Paul.
Let's start off talking a little bit about Western Copper and Gold. You've got the casino project in Yukon, Canada. What is the casino project?
Yeah, so the casino project, large copper gold project that we as a company have been developing, a little over a decade now. 21 million ounces of gold, 11 billion pounds of copper, so significant on both the gold and the copper side. This year has been a very, very exciting year for the project. Just brought in Rio Tinto as a strategic investor, issued a PEA on the project, so bringing all the economics up to date. And really where we are right now is looking at the project, moving it forward into a feasibility study and then back into permitting.
Excellent. Congratulations. A lot of points to go over there. Well, let's start. The gold price is relatively high, copper prices at near historical levels. So I imagine you've got a lot of copper, you've got a lot of gold. I imagine you're getting a lot more interest. And obviously evidence of that is Rio Tinto taking an investment in the company. So are you very much coming back onto the investor radar?
Yeah, it's been very interesting. As I think people that have followed this space, copper is sort of been in the doldrums for a number of years, and then really has had a very, very, very strong comeback. And those of us that have been following it knew that this was going to happen. Copper is a different animal than gold. It needs large projects like our casino project to come online. There just has been a real dearth of them coming online over the past little while. There's not a lot of them out there. If you want to invest in a copper junior, there's maybe a dozen copper juniors that you can invest in. And, I'd argue, but 3 or 4 of them, including us, are worth investing in. So, yeah, we did an equity raise at the end of last year and raised, $28 million at that time. And the lead orders were blue chip investors out of the US, big funds out of the US. So lots of interest in copper from really across the sector, and excitingly, the generalists are starting to invest in it as well.
Okay, well, let's talk about one of your sort of newest investors, Rio Tinto. Your PEA, I think if I remember correctly, posited a sort of 25-year mine life. Obviously, Rio Tinto is interested in long life mining assets. So tell us a little bit about that. How did they become involved in the company? How did you get them invested? And what kind of thing are they looking for in casino?
Yeah. First of all, I just, correct. It's the first phase is 25 years, but really the PA talked about even the second phase, bringing it up to a 47-year mine life. So a very, very long life mine. Yeah. We talked to Rio for about a year and a half before we finally signed the deal. And, they started off by, we signed a confidentiality agreement. They did some initial diligence. And then sort of last summer, we began to have more serious conversations. And really where those conversations went is that, Rio said, look, we love the project. We think it's great, but we really need to roll our sleeves up and really dig into the project and do some very, very good due diligence and, some specific drillings, more met work. We want to sort of meet the government, look at your relationship with the First Nations, all of that work. And so when we looked at that, we said, well, why don't you guys, where the discussions went was, let's do a strategic investment. We'll sign an investor rights agreement as part of that, which will allow you to do all that. And then we'll sit down and talk about you guys taking a bigger investment in the project. So the agreement that we signed, it looks at all that. It's good for 18 months. So there's a timeline on it. So we all have got a bit of a gun to our head to make sure that this gets done in that time period. And then at that time, we'll sit down and presumably, hopefully they'll like what they've seen. And so far, I think that they have, and we'll sign a deal where, likely they'll take a much larger stake of the project.
Okay, thank you. You recently put out a PEA. You've mentioned a couple of the figures already, but can you sort of go over some of the highlights there and some of the sort of key things that you're taking forward from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So PEA really looked at the feasibility study that we did in 2013 and updated it. There, with a couple key modifications. But the headline numbers on it were an IRR at 19.5%, a net present value of 2.3 billion, and that that was at a conservative 335 copper and $1,600 gold. If you look at that, sort of at spot where we are now, you're adding a couple billion to that, and you're up to sort of 4.3 a billion net present value and a IRR of close to 25%. So, that's sort of where this project, I mean, think of this as sort of a 4 billion net present value, mid to high 20 net IRR on the project. And big production from the mine in terms of cash flow. I mean, it's really driven by the first 4 years of the project. In the first 4 years, even at those base case prices, we're looking at cash flows of $1 billion a year over the first 4 years. I mean, huge cash flows, very fast payback. And I think that's why Rio is interested. They look particularly at the core of our deposit, which runs quite a bit higher grade. It's over 0.7 copper equivalent. That's the first 4 years, and that's really what drives the whole economics of the project.
Okay, thank you. And a grade of 0.7, that's, give or take, it's almost double the average production grade in Chile at the moment. So a very healthy grade there. Okay, now compared with, as you mentioned, you did a feasibility study in 2013. Since then, ESG factors have become much more important and much more under the microscope. So what kind of changes were in the PEA in terms of an ESG point of view? Yeah,
and that is actually really one of the biggest drivers of the PEA. So what we did, and the work finished up in 2018, is we actually did what's called a best available tailings technology study. And this was sitting down with the First Nations, the regulator, the Yukon government, with a blank sheet of paper and looking at all of the options to deal with tailings and mine waste. It took us about 1.5 years. I mean, this was a big exercise, all the various engineering groups involved with it. But at the end of that, we had a solution for tailings and mine waste, which was much more protective of the environment, had better buy-in from the First Nations. And that, at 2018, that sort of was at a conceptual design that was now rolled into that PEA. And so that's now at a PEA design. And then the goal now is to move that forward into a feasibility study level design. But, this design has quite a bit less water stored in it. It's almost a dry facility. It's not a dry stack per se, but most of it is relatively dry. And just the management of water, the management of risk is just significantly higher with this facility. So we're all pretty excited about it. We think it's a great way. It's a great facility in terms of the design, and the community and the First Nation, the regulators are much happier with it.
Okay, thank you. So what are the next steps for the project in terms of advancing it? And I imagine, Rio Tinto is going to be helping, guiding you about some of the work they want to see done, and helping bringing their expertise to the table to help you advance in the best way possible. So over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, what are the sort of main goals or main work areas that you'll be focusing on?
Yeah, so this summer, just to put into perspective, really our site program has been the program we agreed to with Rio. So it's been drilling to look at key parts of the resource, some met samples, and a couple exploration holes as well. The next 6 to 12 months, there's going to be a bunch of met work. So there's sort of a bunch of work we're doing with Rio, which is going to be met work and some more work on tailings and thickening and all that sort of stuff. And then in parallel to that, we're really driving forward. I mean, we have to continue to drive the project forward, regardless of what happens with Rio. So that's, a feasibility study, in early 2022, and then the permitting. And, we're looking to hire into the permitting. We're fairly close to sort of building out that team. And the goal is to get the project back in front of the regulator, likely by the end of next year.
And you've been, the local government has been advancing as well in ways which will help advance the project. I understand funding of roads or something of that nature. Tell us a little bit more about that in terms of how the infrastructure to improve accessibility is coming along.
Yeah, I mean, a few years ago, actually the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came to town and made this big infrastructure announcement in terms of roads to resources and fairly big pot of money, and part of that money was earmarked for the first part of the road to our casino mine. And that's been progressing well. So agreements with First Nations, between the Yukon government and the federal government and the First Nations have been signed. Last I saw it was out for tender. They were fairly confident that they were going to be breaking ground this year. Yukon being the Yukon and this being the end of August, they better get going on that. So I feel that might slip a bit, but I think they'll be awarding the tender and at least starting, some of the surface clearing this year. So that's exciting. Yeah, and the Yukon is, I mean, I can't emphasize this enough. It's a very, very mining friendly jurisdiction. The government is behind driving mining. You've got Victoria Gold's Eagle Mine, which has started up. You've got Belkino with that's going. So there's two new mines in the past sort of 3 years. It's a good jurisdiction to move in, and the government is really the wind behind our backs on that.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you've got a lot of exciting and interesting catalysts coming up, Paul. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining me, and join us again soon on Mining Journal for more leader profile interviews.